Welcome back, guys. 80% of you still haven't subscribed. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. The event I'm about to tell you about happened in 2012, but it began 70 years earlier in the deep, dark waters of the Pacific Ocean. When I say darkness, I don't mean just no light. I'm talking about a darkness that swallows time, sound, and even people. My name is Dr. Elise Carter, and I led a deep-sea research trip that found something we should never have found. Something that had been waiting there in the crushing silence of the ocean floor since 1942. And before I continue, I want you to understand something. What we found wasn't just a sunken ship. It was something that shouldn't have existed. It was something that broke every rule we thought we knew about physics, time, and death. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it began, or maybe where it ended. With USS S-26. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. It was January 24, 1942. The war was still young, and America was still hurting from Pearl Harbor. Commander Henry Wallace stood on the bridge of S-26, a diesel-electric submarine that had seen better days even before the war started. The S-class boats were old, slow, and cramped, but they were what the Navy had, and Wallace was determined to make his boat count. The mission orders came through secret channels. Simple enough on paper. Patrol the coordinates near the Gulf of Thailand. Watch Japanese shipping lanes. Report any enemy movement. Standard stuff for a submarine crew that had already survived 3 patrols in dangerous waters. But Wallace felt something that morning, something he couldn't name. He stood on the conning tower watching the sun rise over the Pacific, and he wrote in his log words that wouldn't be discovered until decades later. The men are hearing things. Whispers in the water. I tell them it's just the hull settling, the pressure playing tricks. But I hear them too. Something's out there in the deep, watching, waiting. Lieutenant Mark Davis, the sonar operator, sat hunched over his equipment in the cramped sonar room. At 31, he was one of the older men aboard, experienced enough to know when something wasn't right. And that morning, everything felt wrong. His headphones crackled with the usual ocean sounds. The distant groan of whale song, the click of shrimp, the endless whisper of current moving through water. But underneath it all, there was something else. A pattern, a rhythm that didn't belong to nature. "Sir," he called up to Wallace through the voice tube, "I'm picking up something on the passive array. It's not mechanical, not biological either. It's like nothing I've ever heard before." Wallace descended into the sonar room, squeezing through the narrow hatch. "Show me." Davis adjusted the frequency, isolating the sound. Through the headphones came a low hum, steady and rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. But it was too slow, too deep, and it seemed to be coming from below them, from the ocean floor itself. "Depth under keel?" Wallace asked. 1,800 meters, sir. Nothing but mud and rock down there. Then it's probably just a thermal layer playing tricks with the sound waves." But Wallace didn't believe his own words. Neither did Davis. They exchanged a look that said everything they couldn't speak aloud. Something was wrong with these waters. The next few hours passed in routine. The crew went about their duties with the mechanical efficiency of men who'd learned to live inside a steel tube under crushing pressure. Engineer Paul Monroe, 27 years old and brilliant with machinery, tended to the diesel engines with the care of a man caring for a living thing. He knew every sound the boat made, every vibration, every groan of metal against the sea. That's why he noticed when the sounds changed. Started small. A slight variation in the engine pitch. A vibration in the deck plates that shouldn't be there. Monroe pressed his hand flat against the hull, feeling the metal. Cold. Colder than it should be at this depth, and something else. A vibration that didn't match the engines. It was coming from outside, from the water itself. In the radio room, Corporal Ethan Price sat before his equipment, monitoring the secret channels. At 25, he was the youngest officer aboard, still eager, still believing the war would be over soon, and he'd go home with stories to tell. He didn't know yet that some stories are better left untold. The radio hissed with static, normal. But then, cutting through the white noise, came a sound that made his blood freeze. A voice. Faint, distorted, speaking in a language that might have been English, but sounded wrong. The words were stretched out, as if time itself had warped them. S-26. Respond. Coordinates. Price grabbed the handset. This is USS S-26. Identify yourself. Over. Nothing. Just that endless static. Then the voice again, clearer this time. Turn back. The deep is not yours. Turn back before you see what waits below. Price's hand shook as he reached for the intercom. But before he could call the captain, the voice cut off, replaced by that same deep hum Davis had detected on sonar. The sound that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. He should have reported it immediately. That was protocol. But something stopped him. Fear maybe, or the sense that once he spoke those words aloud, once he made them real, there would be no taking them back. By 1400 hours, the entire crew felt it. That wrongness in the water. The way the submarine seemed to move slower, as if pushing through something thicker than seawater. The way shadows seemed to linger in corners even when the lights were bright. The way the temperature dropped despite the working heaters. Commander Wallace called a meeting with his senior officers in the cramped wardroom. Davis, Monroe, and Price gathered around the small table, their faces lit by the dim overhead bulb. "Gentlemen," Wallace began, his voice steady, but his eyes showing the strain. "I need to know I'm not losing my mind. Tell me what you've experienced in the last 12 hours. They looked at each other, each waiting for someone else to speak first. Finally, Davis broke the silence. "The sonar is picking up sounds that shouldn't exist, sir. Patterns that don't match any known vessel or sea life. And the frequency keeps shifting, like it's trying to communicate." Monroe nodded. "The engines are running normally, but there's a vibration in the hull. It's not mechanical failure. It's external. Something's affecting us from outside." Price swallowed hard before speaking. "Sir, I received a radio transmission. A warning. It told us to turn back." Wallace leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "I've been in these waters for 20 years, served on 7 different boats. I've seen strange things. The ocean plays tricks on men's minds. But this..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This feels different. This feels deliberate." "What are your orders, sir?" Davis asked. Wallace was quiet for a long moment. He thought about his wife back in San Diego, his daughter who was just learning to read, the promise he'd made to come home safe. But he also thought about duty, about the mission, about the men counting on him to make the right call. "We continue the patrol," he said finally. "But we stay sharp. We trust our instruments and we trust each other. And if things get worse..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. That night, at 2,200 hours, S-26 descended to patrol depth, 150 meters below the surface, deep enough to avoid detection, shallow enough to surface quickly if needed. The crew settled into the quiet routine of night watch. Half the men sleeping in their cramped bunks, the other half monitoring the boat systems with tired eyes. Davis sat at his sonar station, headphones pressed against his ears. The ocean sang its usual song, but underneath, that hum continued, growing louder, growing closer. Then, at 2,347 hours, everything changed. The sonar screen lit up with contacts, dozens of them, surrounding the submarine in a perfect circle. But they weren't moving like ships. They weren't moving like anything natural. "Captain to sonar," Davis called, his voice tight with fear. "We have multiple contacts bearing all around. Range closing." Wallace appeared within seconds. "Identify." "I can't, sir. They're not giving off engine noise, not magnetic signatures. They're just there." Wallace grabbed the periscope handles, swinging the scope in a full circle. Through the lens, he saw only darkness. The moon was hidden behind clouds and the sea was black as ink. But then he saw them. Shapes in the water, massive, moving with purpose, circling the submarine like sharks around prey. "All stop," Wallace ordered. "Silent running. Now." The engines cut to idle. The crew froze at their stations, barely breathing. In the silence, they could hear it clearly now. That hum vibrating through the hull, through their bones, through their very souls. Monroe was in the engine room when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then they went out completely, plunging the boat into complete darkness. Emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in creepy red. And in that red light, Monroe saw something that made his mind rebel against understanding. The hull was weeping. Water seeped through seals that had been checked and double-checked. Not spraying with pressure, but oozing like the ocean itself was trying to force its way inside. And the water was wrong. Too dark, too thick, almost alive. "We have flooding in the engine room," Monroe shouted into the intercom. "But sir, it's not coming from any breach I can find. It's just appearing." In the control room, Wallace made the only decision he could. "Emergency surface. Blow all tanks. Get us up now." The boat lurched as high-pressure air screamed into the ballast tanks. S-26 began to rise, climbing toward the surface, toward air, toward safety. But the shapes in the water rose with them, keeping pace, maintaining that perfect circle. 50 meters from the surface, then 40, then 30. That's when the hum changed. It became a screech, high-pitched and overwhelming, that made the crew clutch their ears in pain. The submarine shook violently. Rivets popped. Seams groaned. And then, with a sound like reality tearing apart, something grabbed them. Not with hands, not with anything physical, but with something else. Something that reached through the water, through the steel, through the very fabric of space, and pulled. S-26 stopped rising, hung suspended in the water. The engines roared at full power, but they weren't moving. They were caught, held by forces that shouldn't exist. Price in the radio room grabbed his microphone and began broadcasting on all frequencies. His voice steady despite the terror. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is USS S-26, position 7 degrees north, 98 degrees east. We are under attack by unknown forces. We are unable to surface. Request immediate assistance. Mayday, mayday, may." The transmission cut off. Not because the radio failed, but because time itself seemed to skip. One moment Price was speaking. The next moment he was seeing his hand still on the microphone. His mouth still forming words, but no sound emerged. In that moment of frozen time, Wallace understood. This wasn't an attack. This was something worse. They hadn't stumbled into enemy territory. They'd crossed into something else entirely. A place where the rules of the world didn't apply. Where the ocean was more than water and steel wasn't protection. The lights dimmed further, the red glow fading to almost nothing. In the darkness, the crew heard voices, not over the radio or intercom, but in their heads, whispers in 1,000 languages, all saying the same thing. "You should not have come here. This deep is ours. Always has been, always will be." Monroe, working frantically to restore power, felt the cold water rising around his ankles. He looked down and saw his reflection in the dark surface. Except it wasn't his reflection. The face staring back at him was older, weathered, eyes hollow with decades of watching and waiting. Davis tore off his headphones as the sonar screen showed something impossible. The contacts weren't around them anymore. They were inside the submarine, moving through the compartments, through the walls, through the crew themselves. And Wallace, standing in the control room with his officers around him, made the hardest decision of his life. He reached for the emergency scuttle lever, the one designed to sink the boat in seconds if capture was coming. "Forgive me," he whispered to his crew, to his family, to God. But before his hand touched the lever, the submarine lurched downward. Not sinking, being pulled, down past safe diving depth, down past crush depth. The hull groaned in protest, but it didn't collapse. It held together even as the depth gauge spun past numbers that should have killed them all. 200 meters, 300, 500, 1,000. The pressure should have crushed them like an empty can, but it didn't, because they weren't in normal water anymore. They were in something else, somewhere else. Price, his voice finally returning, spoke into his radio one last time. His words would be recorded, stored in the black box that would never be recovered. "All stations, this is S-26, final transmission. We are at depth impossible. Systems failing, hull intact, but we cannot surface, cannot. Something has us, can't see it, but it's all around, in the water, in the boat, in us. If anyone receives this, don't come looking. Don't. The deep doesn't give back what it takes. Tell our families we fought. Tell them we. His voice trailed off as the lights finally died completely. In the complete darkness, the crew of USS S-26 waited. Some prayed, some wept, some simply sat in silence, accepting what was coming. Commander Wallace stood at his station, hands gripping the periscope handles, and spoke his final log entry into the darkness. January 25, 1942, 0023 hours. This is Commander Henry Wallace, USS S-26. We have descended beyond recovery depth. All attempts to surface have failed. The crew remains at their stations. Whatever has taken us does not intend to let us go. To whoever finds this record, if anyone ever does, know that we did our duty to the end. And know this, the ocean is deeper than any chart shows, older than any history records. And in that deep, in that ancient dark, things wait that we were never meant to disturb. We disturbed them, and now we pay the price. God help anyone who follows us down. The submarine settled onto the ocean floor with a gentle thud. The hull creaked once, then fell silent. Inside, the crew waited for the end, for the crushing pressure, for the cold water to finally breach the hull and claim them. But it never came. Instead, they heard something else. A sound like a clock ticking, regular, eternal. Counting down or counting up, they couldn't tell. And in that rhythm, they realized the terrible truth. They weren't going to die. Not quickly, not mercifully. They were going to wait, in the dark, in the cold, in the crushing silence of the deep. Wait for something they couldn't name, for someone they would never see. Wait for 70 years to pass above them while they remained suspended in a single endless moment. Wait until the day when someone else would disturb the deep and find what should have stayed lost forever. 70 years is a long time for the world above. Entire generations born, lived, and died. Wars fought and ended. Technology that would seem like magic to the crew of S-26 became everyday reality. The world moved on. But in the deep, time doesn't move the same way. I'm Dr. Elise Carter, and I need to tell you about the day we found them. The day everything I thought I knew about the ocean, about death, about the nature of reality itself got torn apart and put back together into something I still can't fully understand. It was March 2012. I was leading a deep-sea acoustic research project in the Gulf of Thailand. Our mission was simple, or so we thought. Map the ocean floor using advanced sonar, catalog geological features, study deep-sea ecosystems, standard stuff for a marine research trip. Nothing that should have led to what we discovered. Our ship, the research vessel Endeavour, was anchored about 60 miles off the Thai coast. Clear skies, calm seas, perfect conditions for deep water work. My team consisted of 8 people, specialists in their fields, good people who trusted me to bring them home safe. I remember that morning with perfect clarity, the kind of detail that gets burned into your memory when your life divides into before and after. I was in the sonar room with Marcus Chen, our acoustic systems operator, 32 years old, brilliant mind, coffee addict. He'd been running passive sonar sweeps all night, listening to the ocean symphony. "Doc, you need to hear this," he said, pulling off his headphones with a confused expression. I moved to his station. "What am I looking at?" "That's just it. I don't know. It started about 20 minutes ago. Low-frequency transmission on a band that hasn't been used since the Cold War. But here's the weird part. He adjusted the frequency filter. It's not coming from the surface. It's coming from depth, about 1,800 meters down." I leaned closer to the screen. The signal was faint but distinct. A steady pulse, almost rhythmic. Could be a research buoy that sank. Or maybe military equipment from an old exercise. That's what I thought. But listen to this. Marcus isolated the signal and played it through the speakers. What we heard made my skin crawl. Underneath the electronic pulse was something else. A sound that shouldn't be there. It was organic somehow, like breathing. And beneath that, barely audible, was something that sounded almost like voices. Run it through the analysis software, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Clean up the signal. I want to know exactly what we're hearing. While Marcus worked, I stepped out onto the deck. The ocean stretched to the horizon in every direction. Deep blue and seemingly endless, peaceful, beautiful, hiding secrets in its depths that men weren't meant to find. Sarah Williams, our dive operations coordinator, joined me at the rail. 45 years old, former Navy, 20 years of deep-sea experience. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was her. Marcus found something, I told her. A signal from depth, old frequency, old enough to be from World War II? The batteries would have died decades ago, Sarah said. I know, but it's there, clear as day. We stood in silence for a moment, both of us understanding what this meant, what it could mean. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice low. There were submarines lost in these waters during the war, never recovered. The records are spotty, but I've heard rumors. How many? Officially, 3 American submarines were lost in the Pacific Theater with no wreckage ever located. Unofficially, she paused. The number's higher, a lot higher. Marcus called us back inside. His face was pale, eyes wide behind his glasses. You need to see this. The computer finished the analysis. The cleaned-up signal played through the speakers. This time, there was no mistaking it. Beneath the electronic pulse was a voice, distorted, stretched thin across decades, but unmistakably human. All stations, report in. Anyone still here? The 3 of us stood frozen, staring at the speakers like they might reach out and grab us. Marcus finally found his voice. That's not possible. That can't be real. But it was real. And it was repeating the same words over and over in a loop that had been running for God knows how long. I made the decision right there. We're going down. Sarah, prep the ROV. I want eyes on whatever is making that transmission. Doc, Sarah said carefully. Maybe we should report this first, get clearance. This could be a military matter. And spend 3 months waiting for bureaucrats to decide whether we're allowed to investigate? By then, the signal could stop. This could disappear. I shook my head. We found it. We investigate it. That's the job. Within 2 hours, we had the remote-operated vehicle in the water. A sophisticated piece of equipment capable of diving to 3,000 meters, equipped with high-definition cameras and powerful lights. We watched the monitors as it descended through layers of blue that gradually darkened to black. 100 meters, 150, 170. The seafloor came into view. Flat, muddy, dotted with rocks and coral formations. Nothing unusual, nothing that would explain the signal. Heading northeast, I instructed our ROV pilot, Tom Brennan. Follow the signal strength. The vehicle glided across the bottom, its lights cutting through clouds of sediment. Fish scattered before it. An octopus pulsed away into the darkness. Normal deep-sea life. Then the lights caught something that wasn't normal at all. At first, it looked like just another rock formation. But as we got closer, the shape resolved into something man-made. Metal encrusted with decades of growth, but still recognizable. Is that? Tom's voice trailed off. A submarine? Sarah finished. World War II era from the look of it. S-class if I'm not mistaken. The ROV circled the wreck slowly. The submarine sat upright on the seafloor, almost as if it had been gently placed there rather than crashing down. The hull was intact. No visible damage. No holes torn in the steel. It shouldn't have sunk at all based on what we could see. But what made my blood run cold was something else entirely. Tom, I said quietly, are those lights? He adjusted the camera focus. Through the murky water, we could see faint illumination coming from inside the submarine, not the ROV's lights reflecting back. These were coming from within, a dim red glow pulsing through portholes that should have been black and dead. That's not possible, Marcus whispered. Even if there was power left, which there couldn't be, those bulbs would have burned out decades ago. Sarah leaned closer to the screen. Look at the identification numbers on the conning tower. Can you make them out? Tom maneuvered the ROV closer, zooming in. Through the coral and rust, we could just barely read the numbers painted on the hull. S-26. Sarah pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. After a moment, she looked up, her face pale. USS S-26, reported lost with all hands. January 1942. Position unknown. Entire crew declared dead. 46 men. The signal, Marcus said. It's coming from inside, from the radio room. We watched in silence as the ROV completed its circuit of the submarine. Everything about it was wrong. The position was too perfect. The hull too intact. And those lights, that impossible red glow, pulsing like a heartbeat. I'm picking up something else, Tom said, adjusting his instruments. Temperature readings near the hull. They're fluctuating, warmer than the surrounding water by several degrees. Thermal vents. I suggested, knowing even as I said it that it wasn't the answer. No vents in the area, and the heat signature is too localized. It's centered on the submarine itself. I made a decision that I've questioned every day since. We need to go inside. Get the deep dive team ready. Tomorrow morning, we're sending divers down. Sarah grabbed my arm. Elise, listen to yourself. There are lights on in a submarine that's been underwater for 70 years. There's a radio transmission coming from equipment that shouldn't work. This isn't natural. This isn't safe. Which is exactly why we need to investigate. Think about what this could mean. If there's some phenomenon we don't understand, some aspect of deep-sea physics we've missed, this could rewrite everything we know. Or it could kill us, Sarah said bluntly. I've been doing this long enough to know when something feels wrong. And this feels very, very wrong. But I wouldn't listen. I was too excited by the discovery, too driven by curiosity to see the warning signs that were right in front of me. That night, as the crew slept, I stayed in the sonar room, monitoring the signal. The voice continued its endless loop. All stations, report in, anyone still here. Over and over, never changing, never stopping. Around 0200, something new happened. The voice suddenly stopped mid-sentence. For about 30 seconds, there was only silence and the background hum of the ocean. Then a different voice came through, older, tired, filled with something that might have been hope or might have been warning. If you can hear this, don't come down. Don't. We're still here. We've always been here, but we're not alive. Not really. And if you come down, you'll understand. You'll see what we've become, what this place does. Turn back while you can, please. Don't let curiosity kill you the way it killed us. Then silence again, followed by the original message resuming its loop. I sat there shaking, staring at the speakers. Every instinct screamed at me to do exactly what the voice said. Pull up anchor. Leave this area. Forget we ever found S-26. But I didn't because I needed to know. I needed to understand. The next morning, I briefed the dive team. Along with Sarah, we had two technical divers, James Porter and Miguel Santos. Both experienced in deep wreck penetration, both confident they could handle whatever we found. Standard procedure, I told them. External survey first. Document everything. Then if it's safe, we attempt entry through the main hatch. In and out in 40 minutes. Any sign of danger, you abort immediately. They nodded, checking their equipment with practiced efficiency. Mixed gas rebreathers for the depth, powerful lights, cutting tools in case they needed to force entry. Everything they'd need for a normal deep wreck dive. Except this wasn't normal, and I knew it. By 1,000 hours, James and Miguel were in the water, descending along the guideline we deployed. Sarah and I watched from the monitors in the dive control room. The camera mounted on James's helmet gave us a diver's eye view as they dropped into the blue. The descent took 12 minutes. Then the seafloor appeared, and moments later the submarine came into view. In the light of their lamps, S-26 looked even more wrong than it had through the ROV's camera. The metal was old, yes, but not degraded the way it should be. It was almost preserved, as if the ocean hadn't been allowed to claim it fully. Approaching the conning tower, James reported, his voice calm and professional. Hull appears intact, no visible breaches. Proceeding to the main deck, they swam along the length of the submarine, their lights revealing details that shouldn't exist. The deck gun was still in place, pointing uselessly at the dark water above. Anchor chains hung motionless, and through every porthole, that red glow pulsed steadily. "Doc!" Miguel's voice crackled through the calm. "I'm seeing something strange with the portholes. The glass is intact, but there's condensation on the inside, like someone's been breathing in there." "That's impossible," Sarah muttered beside me. "At this depth, at this temperature, any moisture inside would have frozen and crystallized years ago." But there it was on the video feed. Fog on the inside of the glass. Fresh, recent, impossible. James reached the main hatch. The heavy steel door that should have been sealed tight, rusted shut, impossible to open without hydraulic tools. He grabbed the wheel mechanism, expecting it to be frozen solid. It turned easily, smoothly, as if it had been oiled yesterday. "The hatch is unsealed," James reported, his voice suddenly uncertain. "It's like someone left it open for us." "Don't open it yet," I said. "Run your sensors first. Check for pressure differential, gas composition, anything unusual." James deployed his equipment, taking readings. After a moment, he spoke and I could hear the confusion in his voice. "Pressure inside matches ambient. But Doc, the gas mix, there's oxygen in there. Not much, but it's present, and the temperature. It's warmer inside than the surrounding water." Sarah and I exchanged looks. This was beyond wrong. This was impossible. "James," I said carefully, "I need you to make a call. Do you feel safe proceeding?" There was a long pause. I could see his helmet camera shifting as he looked at Miguel, then back at the hatch. Finally, he answered, "We've come this far. Let's see what's inside." He pulled the hatch open fully and his light cut into the interior of S-26. The beam revealed a ladder descending into red-lit darkness. And rising from that darkness came something that made every person in the dive control room go absolutely silent. Music. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. The kind of big band music that was popular in the 1940s. Glenn Miller or Benny Goodman. The sound of an era 70 years dead. Playing from a radio that shouldn't work. In a submarine that shouldn't be intact at a depth where nothing should survive. "We're going in," James said. His voice steady despite what he was hearing. "James, wait," I started to say. But he was already descending the ladder, Miguel following close behind. Their cameras showed them entering the conning tower, then moving down into the control room. And what they found there would haunt me for the rest of my life. The interior of S-26 was pristine. Not aged, not rusted, not flooded. The controls gleamed as if they'd been polished. The gauges were all reading normally. The red emergency lights cast everything in a hellish glow. But they were working. All of them working. And in the control room, standing at their stations as if ready for orders, were the crew. The camera feed from James's helmet showed us something that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist. But there it was, undeniable and terrifying in its impossibility. The crew of USS S-26 stood at their stations. Not corpses, not skeletons picked clean by deep-sea scavengers. They stood upright, hands on controls, faces turned toward their instruments, dressed in their uniforms from 1942, looking exactly as they must have looked the night they went down. Except they weren't moving, not breathing, not blinking, just standing there in the red emergency light like statues made of flesh. "Oh my God," Miguel whispered, his voice cracking through the calm. "Doc, are you seeing this?" I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up. Beside me, Sarah had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with horror. James moved his light slowly across the control room. 6 men stood at their stations. Their skin had a strange waxy quality, preserved but wrong. Their eyes were open but empty, staring at nothing. One man's hand was frozen on the dive plane controls. Another stood at the periscope, hands still gripping the handles. A third sat at the navigation table, pencil held over a chart as if he'd been interrupted mid-calculation. "They're not decomposed," James said, his scientific training taking over despite his fear. "There's no bloating, no tissue degradation. They look like they died seconds ago, not 70 years. He approached the nearest figure slowly. An officer based on the insignia, young, maybe 30. His face was calm, almost peaceful. James reached out carefully and touched the man's shoulder. The body was cold, but not cold like dead flesh in freezing water. Cold like metal, cold like something that had never been truly alive. And the moment James made contact, everything changed. The lights flickered. The music, that impossible 1940s music, suddenly grew louder. And throughout the submarine, we heard movement. Footsteps, doors opening and closing, voices murmuring in the distance. "James, get out," I said, finding my voice at last. "Get out now." But before he could move, the officer he touched spoke. His lips didn't move. His chest didn't rise with breath, but words came from him anyway, hollow and echoing as if spoken from somewhere very far away. "You came. After all this time, you finally came." James stumbled backward, colliding with Miguel. Both divers stood frozen, their lights cutting wild patterns across the control room. "Who are you?" James managed to ask. "Lieutenant Mark Davis, sonar operator, USS S-26. The voice continued, still without the lips moving. "We've been waiting so long. Do you know what it's like to wait for 70 years? To be trapped between one heartbeat and the next? To exist in a moment that never ends." "What happened to you?" Miguel asked. "To your boat." Davis's head turned slowly, mechanically, to face them. His eyes, which had been empty, suddenly focused with terrible clarity. "We went too deep, found something we shouldn't have found, woke something that should have stayed asleep. And now we're part of it, part of the deep, part of the dark forever." Another figure stirred, an older man at the engineering station. He turned toward the divers with the same mechanical movement. And when he spoke, his voice was different, but carried the same hollow quality. "I'm Engineer Paul Monroe. We tried to escape, tried to surface, but the deep wouldn't let us go. Pulled us down, not to kill us. That would have been mercy. It pulled us down to keep us, to make us part of itself." Throughout the submarine, more figures began to move. Not walking, but shifting, turning. Their eyes all focusing on the two divers who had disturbed their eternal vigil. "James, Miguel, swim." Sarah's voice cut through the calm, sharp with command. "Swim now. Don't look back. Just go." But as James turned toward the ladder, a figure blocked his path. A young man, early 20s, dressed in the uniform of a radio operator. The nameplate on his chest read Price. "You can't leave," Corporal Ethan Price said, his voice younger than the others, but just as hollow. "You touched us. You made contact. Now you're connected. The deep knows you're here. It won't let you go any more than it let us go." "Move aside," James said, trying to sound authoritative, but his voice shaking. "I'm trying to warn you," Price continued. "When we first went down, we thought we could escape. We didn't understand. The deep doesn't work like the world above. Time is different here. Space is different. Death is different. You're already part of it now. You just don't know it yet." From deeper in the submarine came a sound. Not the music, not the mechanical hum, but something organic, wet, breathing, the sound of something massive moving through spaces too small to contain it. "There's something else on this boat," Miguel said, his light sweeping toward the rear compartments. "Something that isn't crew." "That's what took us," Davis said. "What changed us. It lives in the deep places, the trenches that go down forever, the cracks in the ocean floor where the world opens up and shows what's underneath. It's old, older than the ocean, older than the land, and it collects things. Ships, submarines, planes. Anything that disturbs its domain, keeps them, preserves them, adds them to its collection. Like a museum," Price added. "Except we're still aware, still conscious, trapped in our bodies, unable to move, unable to die. Just existing in this eternal moment while it studies us, learns from us, prepares." "Prepares for what?" James asked. The crew exchanged looks, and for the first time, something like emotion crossed their preserved faces. "Fear. For when it decides to rise," Monroe said quietly. "For when it gets tired of collecting and decides to claim the surface world for itself." A door at the rear of the control room swung open slowly. Beyond it, the corridor leading to the engine room stretched into darkness. But that darkness wasn't empty. It was full. Full of something that moved with purpose, that breathed with a rhythm like waves, that watched with attention that felt physical. From that darkness came a voice. Not human, not trying to be human, just raw intention given sound. New specimens. Welcome to the collection. The temperature in the submarine, already cold, dropped further. Ice began forming on the metal surfaces. The red lights flickered and dimmed, and the crew, those preserved men who had been standing at their stations, began to move toward the divers with slow, inevitable steps. "Go!" Davis suddenly shouted. And this time, his lips actually moved, his face contorting with effort. "While I can still fight it. Go. Don't let it take you, too." James didn't need to be told twice. He shoved past Price, who seemed frozen by Davis's moment of rebellion, and grabbed the ladder. Miguel was right behind him. They climbed frantically, their gear clanging against the metal, their breath loud in their regulators. Behind them, they could hear the crew moving, not fast, but steady. And beneath that, the sound of something larger, something that filled the submarine with its presence, that made the hull groan and the water itself seem to thicken. They burst out of the hatch onto the submarine's deck. The water around them had changed. It was darker now, thicker, almost syrupy. And in that darkness, shapes moved. Large shapes, circling the submarine like sharks around prey. "Surface?" James gasped into his comm. "We're surfacing now." They kicked hard for the surface, following their guideline up through the water, but the line felt wrong. Too long, as if the distance they needed to travel had somehow stretched. They kept swimming, ascending, but the surface seemed to stay the same distance above them. "Something's wrong," Miguel panted. "We should have reached 50 meters by now. We're still showing 180 on the depth gauge." In the dive control room, Sarah was seeing the same readings. "That's impossible. They've been ascending for 3 minutes. They should be at 60 meters. I grabbed the comm. "James, are you still following the guideline?" "Yes," came his strained reply. "But Doc, the water, it's not normal. It's like swimming through gelatin. And I can see the surface above us. I can see the light. But we're not getting any closer." That's when I understood. The submarine wasn't the only thing trapped. The entire area around it was caught in whatever phenomenon held S-26. Space itself was warped, stretched, trapped in a loop that led nowhere. "Cut away from the line," I ordered. "Swim horizontally. Get away from the submarine's position. Distance is the key." They changed direction, swimming parallel to the seafloor instead of ascending. For a moment, nothing changed. Then suddenly, the resistance in the water decreased. Their depth gauges began climbing normally. The darkness lightened. 20 minutes later, they broke the surface 500 meters from the ship. We pulled them aboard, got them out of their gear, wrapped them in blankets despite the tropical heat. Both men were shaking, eyes distant, faces pale. James spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "The crew is alive, document. Not alive like us, but aware, conscious, trapped in their bodies for 70 years. And there's something else down there with them. Something that's keeping them, collecting them." That night, as the ship sat at anchor, we debated what to do. Report to the authorities, attempt another dive, pack up and leave, pretend we never found S-26. The decision was taken from us. At 0300, the alarms went off. Every system on the ship simultaneously detecting something rising from the deep. The sonar screen lit up with a contact directly beneath us. Massive, larger than the ship itself, moving upward at impossible speed. I ran to the deck rail and looked down into the dark water. The ocean was glowing, not with bioluminescence, but with that same red light we'd seen in the submarine. And in that light I could see shapes, dozens of them. Hundreds. Ships and submarines and aircraft, all preserved, all intact, all rising from the depths where they'd been held. S-26 broke the surface first. Water cascaded off its hull as it rose impossibly, violating every law of physics. The conning tower emerged, then the deck. Then the entire submarine sat on the surface as if it weighed nothing at all. And standing on the deck were the crew, all 46 of them, looking up at our ship with those empty, hollow eyes. Commander Wallace stood at the front. When he spoke, his voice carried across the water without need for amplification. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have touched us. Now the deep knows about you, knows about your ship, and it always collects what it knows." Around us, more vessels surfaced. A Japanese destroyer from World War II, a Chinese fishing trawler, a Coast Guard cutter, a yacht. Ships from different eras, different nations, all in perfect condition, all crewed by figures that should be dead, but weren't. They formed a circle around the Endeavor, closing in slowly. The water between the vessels began to churn and bubble, and from that churning water, something else began to emerge. First came tentacles, but not like any squid or octopus. These were wrong. Segmented like insects, covered in what looked like eyes, moving with intelligence and purpose. They wrapped around the hull of our ship, not crushing it but holding it, claiming it. "Everyone to the emergency raft," I shouted. "Abandon ship now." The crew scrambled to deploy the life raft. We threw in emergency supplies, communications equipment, anything we could grab. Sarah was herding people toward it when Miguel grabbed her arm. "Look at the water," he said. The ocean around the raft was changing, darkening, thickening into that same syrupy consistency that had trapped the divers. If we got in the raft and tried to paddle away, we'd be caught just like they'd been caught underwater. We were trapped, held on our own ship by forces we didn't understand and couldn't fight. That's when I saw movement on S-26. Lieutenant Davis, the sonar operator, was climbing over the side of the submarine into the water. Not with the mechanical movements of the controlled crew, but with human urgency. He swam toward our ship, fighting against the thick water, his preserved body somehow still capable of movement. He reached our hull and climbed up the emergency ladder. When he pulled himself onto the deck, I could see the effort it took him. Whatever force controlled the crew didn't want him here, but he fought it. "I can help," he gasped, and his voice was more human than it had been in the submarine. The entity, it's not a single being. It's an intelligence that fills the deep, ancient, vast, but it has rules, patterns. I've been studying it for 70 years. I think I know how to break its hold. "How?" Sarah asked. "Fire," Davis said. "It preserves things, keeps them intact. Fire is the opposite of preservation. This chaos, destruction, the one thing the entity can't control or collect." "You want us to burn the ship?" I asked. "Not just the ship S-26, all the vessels it's raised. Break the collection, destroy what it's preserved. That might be enough to make it retreat, at least temporarily." "Might be," Tom said. "That's not exactly reassuring." "It's all I have," Davis replied. He looked at his hands, seeing them as if for the first time in decades. "I don't know how much longer I can maintain control. It's pulling me back. But I had to try, had to warn you, had to do something other than stand and watch for eternity." We made the decision fast. There wasn't time for debate. Sarah ran for the fuel storage. Marcus and Tom started smashing open flare containers. We doused everything we could reach in diesel, creating a trail leading to the fuel tanks. The tentacles around our hull tightened as if the entity sensed our plan. The surrounding ships began to move closer. On each deck, the preserved crews raised their hands in unison, and from those hands came that red light, reaching toward our vessel. "Light it," I ordered. "Light it now." Sarah dropped the flare into the diesel trail. Fire roared to life, spreading across the deck faster than we expected. We ran for the stern, toward the one raft we'd managed to deploy that was still floating free. Behind us, flames engulfed the ship. Davis didn't follow us. He stood in the fire, letting it consume him. And for the first time since 1942, he smiled. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for giving me an ending." We hit the water and swam for the raft. The moment we climbed in, the Endeavor exploded, fuel tanks rupturing, sending fire and debris high into the night sky. The blast wave pushed us away, and mercifully, the water here was normal, allowing us to paddle. But we didn't paddle away. We watched. The fire spread to S-26. Catching on the diesel, we'd managed to splash toward it before fleeing. The old submarine burned. And as it burned, the crew dissolved. Not into ash, but into something else. Light, maybe, or simply ceasing to exist. Release after 70 years of imprisonment. The other vessels caught fire, too. The flames spreading in ways that defied physics, jumping across water gaps, consuming ships that should have been too wet to burn. And with each vessel that burned, we felt something change. The pressure in the air decreased. The thickness of the water returned to normal. The red light dimmed and died. The tentacles retreated beneath the surface. One by one, the burning ships began to sink, their preservation broken, finally allowed to die as they should have died decades before. Within an hour, only debris remained. Floating wreckage, oil slicks catching the moonlight. No sign of the entity, no sign of the collection. We paddled in silence for 3 hours before a passing cargo ship spotted our flare and picked us up. They radioed the Coast Guard. A rescue operation was launched to search for survivors from the Endeavour. But when they reached the coordinates where we'd been anchored, they found nothing unusual. No submarines, no preservation field, just normal ocean depth. The official report said our ship caught fire due to fuel system failure. 8 crew members escaped. No mention of S-26. No mention of what we'd found in the deep. But we knew, and that knowledge changed us. The cargo ship that rescued us brought us to port in Bangkok 3 days later. By then, the official story had already been written. Fuel system malfunction. Tragic loss of vessel. 8 survivors pulled from the water. Investigation pending. We were separated immediately, debriefed individually by men in suits who never showed us identification. They asked the same questions over and over. What did you see? What did you find? What are you planning to report? I told them everything, every detail. The submarine, the crew, the entity, the collection of vessels. I showed them the video footage Marcus had managed to save on a waterproof drive before we abandoned ship. I gave them depth readings, sonar data, everything we'd recorded. They listened without expression, took notes, confiscated all our equipment and data. Then they told me very politely that none of it had happened. Dr. Carter, the lead investigator said, his voice flat and emotionless. You experienced a traumatic event. Fire at sea is terrifying. The human mind under extreme stress can create very vivid hallucinations. What you think you saw was likely a combination of oxygen deprivation, shock, and the disorientation of being in the water at night. I have video evidence, I said. We reviewed your footage. It shows a fire, nothing more. He slid the drive across the table toward me. Your data has been corrupted, I'm afraid. Saltwater damage. A common problem with electronics at sea. I grabbed the drive, knowing before I even looked that they'd wiped it. Every file deleted or corrupted beyond recovery. 70 years of proof gone in an instant. What about my crew? I demanded. They all saw the same thing. 8 people don't have the same hallucination. Your crew has been very cooperative. They understand the trauma you all went through. They understand that sometimes memory can be unreliable after such an event. He stood, straightening his jacket. I suggest you do the same, Dr. Carter. Accept what happened. Move on. Continue your important work. There are many mysteries in the ocean that deserve your attention. This isn't one of them. It was a threat politely delivered. Forget what you saw or face the consequences. I was released 2 days later with a clean record, full pay, and a recommendation that I take some time off to recover. My crew was scattered, reassigned to different projects, different institutions, different countries. Within a month, we'd all been separated so thoroughly that contact between us became nearly impossible. But I couldn't let it go. I returned to my university, to my research position. But everything felt hollow now. How could I study the ocean knowing what lived in its depths? How could I pretend that the world was the safe, predictable place we all believed it to be? I spent months going through archives, naval records, shipping manifests, reports of missing vessels. And I found something that chilled me to my core. S-26 wasn't the only submarine that went missing in that area. Over the last 150 years, at least 40 vessels had vanished without trace in the Gulf of Thailand and surrounding waters. Fishing boats, cargo ships, military vessels, research ships, all gone. No wreckage ever found. No survivors. Just empty ocean where ships used to be. And it wasn't limited to that area. Similar patterns existed all over the world. The Bermuda Triangle, obviously, but also the Devil's Sea off Japan, the South Atlantic Anomaly, the Mariana Trench. Dozens of locations where vessels disappeared at rates far higher than statistical probability could explain. The official explanations were always the same. Weather, equipment failure, human error. But I knew better now. I'd seen what waited in those places, what collected and preserved and kept. 6 months after the incident, I received a package at my office. No return address. Inside was a single item. A ship's bell, brass, heavily tarnished. Engraved on its surface was a name, USS S-26. With it was a note, handwritten on paper that looked old but wasn't water-damaged. Thank you for freeing us. But you should know what you encountered was just one of them. The deep has many collectors, many watchers, many entities that preserve what falls into their domains. We were lucky. You gave us fire. You gave us an ending. Most collections are never found, never freed. They exist in the dark forever, while the world above forgets they ever existed. Be careful, Dr. Carter. Now that you know they exist, they know about you too. And collectors never forget what they've touched. Lieutenant Mark Davis. I keep that bell in my office, a reminder of what I found and what I lost. Sometimes late at night when the building is empty, I swear I can hear it ring softly, though I never touch it. A sound like a warning or maybe a greeting. I tried to continue my research, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. Every time I looked at sonar readings of the ocean floor, I wondered what might be down there. What collections existed in trenches we'd never explored. What preserved vessels sat in perfect condition, crewed by men and women who couldn't die but couldn't live, trapped in moments that stretched into eternity. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the way I flinched at certain sounds, the way I avoided any projects involving deep water, the nightmares that left me exhausted and shaking. They suggested therapy, medication, time off. I took their advice, saw a therapist who specialized in trauma. She was kind, professional, and completely unprepared for what I told her. After 3 sessions, she gently suggested that perhaps oceanography wasn't the right field for me anymore, that maybe I needed a career change somewhere far from water. Maybe she was right. A year after the incident, I resigned from my position, moved inland as far from the ocean as I could get, found work teaching marine biology at a small college in Colorado. The safe here, comfortable. The only water is in rivers and lakes, shallow and surveyed and understood. But I can't forget. I dream about S-26 sometimes, about Lieutenant Davis standing in flames, smiling with relief as he finally found release, about Commander Wallace and his crew trapped for 70 years in a single moment of time, about Corporal Price trying to warn us even as the entity controlled his body. And I dream about the others, the ones we didn't free, the Japanese destroyer, the Chinese trawler, the Coast Guard cutter. All the vessels that surfaced that night and then sank again when the entity retreated. Are they still down there? Still preserved? Still crewed by people who exist between life and death? I think about Engineer Monroe's words. The deep doesn't give back what it takes. But we'd proven that wrong, hadn't we? We'd freed S-26 through fire. We'd broken the collection. But at what cost? The entity retreated that night, yes, but it didn't die. Didn't cease to exist. It just went back down into the darkness, back to its domain, where light doesn't reach and pressure crushes everything that dares to descend. And it's still collecting. 2 years after the incident, Sarah found me. I don't know how she got my address. We'd been forbidden from contacting each other, warned that continuing to discuss the incident would have professional consequences. But she came anyway, driving 12 hours to reach my small town in the mountains. We sat in my living room drinking coffee, not speaking for the first few minutes, just being in the presence of someone else who knew, who remembered, who understood. I can't do this anymore, she finally said. Can't pretend it didn't happen. Can't go through life acting like the world is normal when I know what's down there. What are you going to do? She pulled out a folder thick with documents and photographs. I've been investigating quietly using contacts from my Navy days. And Elise, it's worse than we thought. Much worse. She spread the documents across my coffee table. Reports dating back decades, classified files she shouldn't have had access to, testimonies from survivors of other incidents. All of them describing the same thing. Vessels that shouldn't exist, preserved crews, entities in the deep that collected and kept. There's a pattern, Sarah explained. These incidents cluster around certain coordinates. Deep water, remote locations, areas where the ocean floor drops into trenches or cracks in the Earth's crust. And the incidents are increasing. Used to be one every few years. Now it's multiple times per year. Why? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Because we're going deeper. Technology allows us to explore places we couldn't reach before. We're disturbing things that have been left alone for millennia, and they're responding, defending their territory, building their collections. She showed me a map, red pins marking every incident she documented. The pattern was clear. A network of collection sites across the world's oceans, connected by deep trenches and underwater caves, like a web spanning the entire globe. What are they? I whispered. The entities. What are they really? Sarah shook her head. I don't know. Maybe they're life forms we don't have a category for. Maybe they're something else entirely. But I think they've been here longer than us. Maybe longer than anything on Earth. And they're territorial. So what do we do? Report this? Go public? Who would believe us? We have no proof that can't be dismissed as fake. And anyone with real authority to investigate is either already aware and covering it up or they'll call us crazy. She leaned back, exhausted. I'm not sure there is anything we can do except warn people. Tell our story, hope someone listens. That conversation stayed with me long after Sarah left. The weight of knowledge we couldn't share. The burden of truth no one would believe. But I'm sharing it now. I'm telling you what happened in the Gulf of Thailand in 2012. What we found at coordinates that are now marked as hazardous waters on nautical charts. What exists in the deep places of the world. Watching, waiting, collecting. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. Because anyone who goes near the ocean, who dives into its depths or sails across its surface, should understand what might be waiting below. The ocean isn't just water and fish and coral reefs. It's not just a resource to be used or a frontier to be explored. It's something older, deeper, more complex than we ever imagined. And in its darkest places, where pressure should crush all life, where light never reaches, where the world above is so distant it might as well not exist, things dwell, things that preserve and collect and keep. Things that exist in moments stretched across decades or centuries. Things that blur the line between life and death until there's no meaningful difference anymore. USS S-26 was freed. Those 46 men finally got their ending after 70 years of waiting. But how many others are still down there? How many ships sit on ocean floors around the world, perfectly preserved, crewed by people who can't die but can't truly live? I don't have answers. I don't have solutions. I just have my story and the stories of those who came before me. Sailors who reported strange lights in the water. Divers who encountered vessels that shouldn't exist. Researchers who found readings that defied explanation. We all saw the same thing. We all touched the same truth. And we all learned the same lesson. The deep doesn't give back what it takes. Not easily. Not without cost. 3 years after the incident, I received another package. This time it contained a photograph, black and white, grainy, taken from what looked like a submarine periscope. The image showed the surface of the ocean at night, moonlight on the waves. And in the lower corner, barely visible, was a date stamp, January 24th, 1942. On the back, written in faded ink, were 3 words, "We are waiting." I don't know who sent it. I don't know how they got a photograph from S-26 from the night it went down. I don't want to know, because if that photograph is real, if it somehow survived 70 years underwater and the fire that freed the crew, then it means something else survived too. Some piece of that night, some fragment of the collection. And if pieces can survive, then maybe the entity isn't as gone as we hoped. Maybe it's still down there. Maybe it's rebuilding. Maybe it's planning. Maybe one day it will decide that the surface world has encroached too far, that we've disturbed its domain once too often. And when that day comes, when it rises from the trenches with all its preserved collections, all the ships and crews it's kept through the decades and centuries, will understand the true meaning of the deep. I still teach marine biology. I still talk about ocean ecosystems and marine life and the importance of preserving our seas. But I never mention what I know, what I saw, what I escaped, because some truths are too terrible to share openly. Some knowledge is too dangerous to spread. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people believe the comfortable lies. Let them think the ocean is just water and fish. Let them enjoy their beaches and their cruises and their deep-sea adventures. But I'm telling you now, whoever you are reading this or hearing this story, if you ever find yourself above deep water, if you ever encounter something that doesn't make sense, a vessel that shouldn't be there, lights where there should only be darkness, sounds that don't belong to any known creature, turn around. Surface. Leave. Don't try to investigate. Don't try to understand. Don't try to make contact. Because the deep has rules we don't comprehend. And the entities that dwell in those places don't think like us, don't value life like us. They preserve, they collect, they keep. And once they touch you, once you become part of their attention, you might find that the line between observer and specimen is thinner than you ever imagined. Lieutenant Mark Davis knew that. He spent 70 years learning it. And in the end, he used that knowledge to free himself and his crew. He chose fire over preservation, destruction over eternal waiting, an ending over endless existence. I think about him often. Wonder if he found peace in those final moments. Wonder if the others found it, too. Wonder if somewhere in whatever comes after death, they're together, free, finally able to move beyond that single frozen moment in January 1942. I hope they are. I hope the fire gave them what 70 years in the deep couldn't. Release, rest, an end to watching and waiting. As for me, I'll keep teaching. Keep living my quiet life far from the ocean. Keep the bell from S-26 on my desk as a reminder of what I saw and what I survived. And late at night, when I hear it ring softly, though I never touch it, I'll remember Lieutenant Davis's words. The deep has many collectors, many watchers, many entities that preserve what falls into their domains. I'll remember, and I'll stay far from the water. That's my story. That's what happened when we found USS S-26 in the Gulf of Thailand in 2012. That's the truth about what lives in the deepest places of the ocean. Believe it or don't. Share it or keep it to yourself. But if you ever find yourself out on dark water, if you ever see something that shouldn't be there, if you ever hear voices from the deep calling up to you, remember what I've told you. Remember S-26. Remember the crew that waited for 70 years. Remember that the ocean keeps secrets, and some secrets should stay buried. You're still watching without subscribing. Make sure you don't miss the next story. Subscribe now and share with your friends. Tell us your country, the time you're watching, and if you've ever experienced something unexplainable at sea, post it in the comments below. Because these stories need to be told. These warnings need to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, if enough people know the truth, if enough people understand what waits in the deep, we can avoid disturbing it again. Maybe we can let the ocean keep its mysteries. Let the deep keep its collections, and let the entities that dwell in the darkness remain undisturbed in their ancient domains. That's all we can hope for, all we can pray for, that the deep stays deep, and what waits below stays below forever.